Occasionally we hear about people doing wonderful acts of good deeds and kindness. We actually came up with an idea of random acts of kindness. We talked about that last Sunday evening, that kindness is a part of love, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Kindness is a fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5. And actually last week, as I was putting together the lesson about kindness, one example in the Old Testament came up several times, and that was with King David, and how he had this heart of kindness. So kindness is often seen as the way we treat people, with the kind of attitude we have. Of course, you probably see it a lot at this time of year because it is Christmas, peace on earth, goodwill to men. So that means we're supposed to be kind, right? We're supposed to at least be reminded of having a generous spirit, a gentle spirit, a giving spirit. And that's why, for instance, whenever you go to the store, people are kind. And on the freeways, right? People are kind. Okay. So, sometimes we struggle with kindness. As Christians, though, we think about what kind of kindness that we have received. And we think about how God has been so kind. And that's kind of one of the words we want to look at today, is this kindness. And what does this mean? The kindness that we have received. And if we really understand how much God loves us, cares for us, wants the very best for us, hopefully that is then reflected in our life, the way we treat other people, the way we think about other people, the kind of attitudes we have towards others. But we know it's not always easy. We live in a time when it's easy to be self-centered, to think about my needs, to think about me getting ahead, to think about my life and what's important to me. But I want to look at this example from King David in the Old Testament, perhaps one that we don't really talk about very much, and partly because as you're reading sometimes through the Old Testament, you come along some bigger words, hard to pronounce, people's names, sometimes names of places, and we get lost in the names sometimes. But today we want to just spend a few minutes looking at this illustration of kindness. And when we go through this, I want you to do a couple things. First of all, to think about, where am I in this story of kindness? Maybe you think about, Don had read to us about this man named Mephibosheth. It's a hard name to say. See, I didn't even say it right that time. But by the time I'm done, I may get it right. But here's a man who was in deep trouble, deep poverty. And we're going to find out how he got into that situation. Maybe we are that person. We see ourselves as that person before God. Maybe we see ourselves more in the position of King David, where we have the ability to share and to treat people and to be generous and to be kind to people. And so again, with this sermon, hopefully we can think about where we fit into the story. So in 2 Samuel chapter 9 is primarily where an entire chapter is given to this event in King David's life. And so this is, after he spent many years running from King Saul, who was trying to kill him because he was so jealous and so angry. And yet David also made this union, a relationship, a friendship, a bond, and even a covenant with King Saul's son, whose name was Jonathan. And so they were kind of best of friends. They looked out for each other. They cared about each other. And now we're going to find out how this kindness then is going to be extended to someone else. David is now king. He's settled into the kingdom. Things are going well. I guess we at this point say that King David is no longer this warrior who's going out fighting all the time. He's kind of on the throne. And things have come together. And there's increasing peace, at least among the nations, regarding his kingdom. And so he thinks in his mind, as he reflects, many years after King Saul and his buddy Jonathan were both killed in battle, killed on the same day. But he thinks, is there anyone still left in the house of Saul whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake. And so if we kind of go back in our minds, you don't have to really think too hard because I've got it on the screen. But this is where it comes back to 1 Samuel chapter 20 when David and Jonathan were together. And Jonathan is saying, I know you're going to become king one day. And Jonathan was fine with that, although technically Jonathan should have been the next king, right? After Saul, it kind of is handed down from generation to generation. And that's what Saul ultimately wanted, but Jonathan, the heir to the throne, said, no, David, you're going to be the king. But just one thing, though, would you promise me that you will be good to me and to my family when you become king? Because the idea is that sometimes kings did not treat the family of the previous dynasty very well. So Jonathan said, show me unfailing kindness. That's what we're talking about today, this kindness. Unfailing kindness like that of the Lord as long as I live, so that I may not be killed, and do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. So again, Jonathan is asking David, when you become king, would you continue to show your kindness to me? As a matter of fact, David made the same kind of promise, or we'd say a covenant, to King Saul. Saul's trying to kill him all these years. Once in a while, Saul had this time of sanity where he could actually think straight and actually kind of act like a human being. But he had this conversation with David, and Saul said to David, I know surely you will become king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe my name from my father's family. So David gave his oath to Saul. So again, this covenant, this promise that David said, okay, I will look out for your family. I will make sure that they don't get killed. And so that kind of plays into the story of what's going on here in 2 Samuel. And so the first part we see David saying, I'm remembering this covenant, this promise I made for Jonathan's sake. But look at what it says here. So what he did is he asked around, said, who knows anything about the descendants of Jonathan? And so this man named Ziba comes forward and says, well, I know about Saul's family because I was one of the servants of Saul. And so the king said to Ziba, is there no one still left in the house of Saul whom I can show God's kindness? It's just not my kindness, but kindness on behalf of God. And maybe even at this point, David is thinking in his life, how much God has done for me and how God's blessed me and how God has given me this kingdom. He's given me this wealth. He's given me power. He's given me peace. He's given me victory. God's been so good to me. How can I share with someone else? And so I want to share now this kindness of God. God has blessed me so much. I just need to find a way that I can share that with others. Just as I've been blessed, we can bless others. So we're familiar with the Bible saying that we love because he first loved us. Because of God's love in my life, I'm now able both to love God and to love other people because of God's kindness in my life. And so they get together and he talks with Ziba, and Ziba says, well, there is a man. There is a man named Mephibosheth. But he's not living around here. And as the Bible reading that we had a little bit earlier, it says Mephibosheth was a man who was lame. And it was read how he became lame. When he was 4 years old, this is just after King Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle. The nurse, today we may even say the nanny who was taking care of this little 4-year-old boy, she hears that, the king and his family have been killed, and so she runs and she's fleeing for their lives. And when they're fleeing, this boy falls and he breaks both of his legs. He's lame now in his feet for his entire life. So he's handicapped. He has nothing, but he continues really to be in hiding. He lives in a place called Lo-Debar. Lo-Debar. Now, a lot of translations say that Debar means a place of pasture, right? We would say today maybe a place of plenty, a place of maybe even wealth. But Lo means no. He's living in a place with no pasture, no provision, no wealth. Some people would say like no thing, nothing. He lives in nowhere. And what would a place with no pasture, what would that look like? We would say it's a place of barrenness. a place where there is no life. Here's a man who is crippled in both feet, living in nowhere land. And so King David's going to call him in. He's going to say, come to the palace. We need to talk. We need to find out more about this young man and what he's all about. So here now, Mephibosheth comes to David. You can imagine he's fearful. Fearful perhaps even for his own life. This is what King David says, don't be afraid. And at this point, he may have thought that David's going to kill him. Don't be afraid. David's not going to harm you. He's not here to destroy you. You've had enough in your life already. David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness. So this is the kindness we're talking about. It keeps coming up, this word kindness. And we've talked about this word before at church here. So in the Old Testament, quite often, this is the word that's attributed to God, and it's called hesed. So sometimes it's translated kindness, loving kindness, sometimes translated mercy, sometimes just love. It's the hesed. So oftentimes that's given to God. So again, the New Testament word, if you're familiar a little bit with the New Testament words, agape, right? So what is agape? I mean, it's a huge kind of love we don't understand. We'll never have that while we live in this world, because our love is always imperfect. Our love is always a little bit tainted. It's always a little bit off. But agape is a perfect love. This hesed is kind of working towards this perfection kind of love. And this is what David wants to show. He wants to express his loving concern for Mephibosheth. So David said to him, I'll surely show you the kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. So look what he says. I will bless you. I will watch over you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to restore to you everything that Saul owned. Now, Saul was a previous king. How much do you think he owned? Like, it was more than just like a small house on the back, lot. He was a very wealthy king. All of that is given back to this young man. But not only that, he says, you are always going to eat at my table. I'm going to provide for you. Whenever it's dinner time, you're going to be eating with me. And so what he's saying is this, and this is important when we think about what God has done for us, how God has blessed us, how God's watched out for us. That although because of our lives, we've become crippled. We've become somebody with a handicap. We've become lame. And in society, quite oftentimes, what does that look like? Especially back then. What could a lame person do? They couldn't really do a whole lot. So you think about this young man. What can he do? What can he offer? Does he have wealth? Position? Family reputation? Friends? Does he have gifts or talents? Does he have the ability to work? What is he going to do for David? Nothing. He has nothing to offer except brokenness and shame and struggle and needs. That's what he has to offer. But David is saying, I'm going to bless you. But I'm not just going to help you at a distance. And sometimes we feel good about kindness when we just kind of help people along. But then we forget about them. I'll help you once you're on your own. I'll help you for a short while, but it's got term limits. But David says, I'm going to help you forever, and you're going to eat at my table. So ultimately, what's he saying? You're going to become family. I mean, who eats at the king's table? I mean, you can only invite so many people every day to lunch. Family. They're the only people there on a consistent basis. You're going to become one of us. I'm going to adopt you and bring you in. And you're going to be like my son. You're my best friend's son. Best friend's already died. I'm going to adopt you into the family. And so he received this huge blessing. And Mephibosheth, I got to tell you something. I'm going to call it the guy. I was preparing for this, and I said this over and over. I must have said it 100 times this week. I got it right just about every time. But you people scare me. You just make me nervous. You're judging me. No, I'm just kidding. Because I know that you're so kind. So kind of helps me out with the kindness illustration. So I did it on purpose. Not. But anyway, we'll work through this. But he says, what is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? So, I mean, how does he feel about himself? Is he worthy? Is he saying, well, it's about time. I deserve this. I know the relationship you had with Jonathan. What took you so long, right? He's saying, I don't deserve any of this. I'm surprised you even pay attention. I'm surprised you even asked. Actually, I'm a little bit surprised when you did ask and you found about my condition that you still pursued it. Because David could have said, when he initially asked, he could have said, well, is there anybody else? Somebody a little bit better, a little bit, more helpful, somebody who could maybe help with the dishes after, or like just somebody, not him. Who am I that you would think of me? Do we ever think about that in relationship with God, or is it just, God's quite lucky to have me in his kingdom. I'm just a worker. I've got a good heart. I've been a seeker. God, I go to church every week. Or are we like, God, who am I that you have blessed me? And that's even the heart of King David. Quite often he would say that, who am I? At one point he even looked at his whole kingdom and he saw all his wealth and how much he had been blessed. And he said, who am I, O Lord, that you've brought me this far? And we look at David and say, no, he was a man after God's own heart. And even here we see what kind of heart he had. It's like, well, if anybody should have gotten it, it should have been David. But David's so humble, and he says, why me? You chose me. I can never really get over that. Why God has blessed me, why he's chosen me, why God has invited me into a kingdom. David could say, why God even gave me a kingdom. Why? So he's very humble. But he realizes he has nothing to offer. And yet, David is continuing to show his kindness. And David said, all my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing. Oh, sorry, this is Mephibosheth. All my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king. But you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. What right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? This is a little bit later on, this part of the story. It's a little bit different, but it maybe just adds another dimension to it. Ziba actually kind of pulled a fast one and kind of wanted to be released maybe from serving this young man, or maybe he wanted a piece of the kingdom himself. And he went to David and said, he doesn't really care that much about you anymore. He thinks he's going to become king. He's going to take your position one day. And so David said to Ziba, I'm going to give you that whole portion. And so later on, when David met again with Mephibosheth, that he said, where were you? Why have you done this? And he said, well, Ziba's kind of pulled a fast one, and he's deceived me, and he's deceived you. And you know what David said? He said, I'm going to split the inheritance then. All that you have, I'm going to split it between you and Ziba. And I guess David's really kind of saying, I don't really know what the truth is. I don't know what's going on, but it certainly appears that Ziba was the one who was trying to be deceptive and trick David. And so he says, let him have it all. I don't really care. The only thing I really care about is that you're safe, that you're okay, that you're still alive. That's all. I just care about you. Let him have all the stuff. I don't care about the stuff. And that's kind of when this comes up. He says, I never deserved anything in the first place. You've blessed me well beyond anything I could have ever imagined, anything I could have ever hoped for. You've been there for me. Give it all to him. It means nothing to me. What right do I have, to stand up for myself, to make an appeal, to make this judgment? And so he's willing to say, David, you can give it all to him. And so again, he's in a very humble, contrite position. Then the king summoned Ziba, and Saul's servant said to him, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and to his family. And so all this is now given to him so that he can enjoy. you and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and to bring him the crops that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth said, the grandson of your master will always eat at my table. And so what he has now is he has all of what Saul had, but he has all these servants as well. All of Ziba's family, all of Ziba's servants, they're all going to be working the fields and the lands and everything so that he can be blessed. And so this kindness of David continues to be multiplied in his life. Ziba said to the king, your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do. So Mephibosheth said, he ate at the king's table like one of the king's sons. And so again, all this comes together, and they were blessed, and they continued to eat together. So what does this mean for us? You know, where do we fit into this story? When we think about what God has done and how he's blessed us and he's overseen our lives, he's invited us, although we didn't deserve it, although we had nothing to offer, although we had no strength in ourselves, we had no gifts, we had nothing that we could say to God, look what I've done, look what I can offer you, look how I can help you, look what I deserve. We have none of that. We are like this crippled man living in nowhere. And God says, I want you to come. I want you to come. I want to bless you. I want to give you what you need. I want to give you a place at my table. I want you to be in this relationship with me. God's promised us a heavenly home. To say, I want this to be forever. It seems to be the same kind of language that David used. That always you will eat at my table. Eating at the table that God has provided. And so this is the picture that we find even in the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 4. Because of God's great mercy for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in our transgressions. It is by grace you've been saved. And God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus. And so here's the New Testament picture of what David was doing, of what God continues to do for all of us. So David, like God, shows kindness and grace, compassion, the hesed of God, revealed in a very personal and practical application. But it's also an invitation for us. And so ultimately, I'm guessing we decide whether we're going to accept the invitation. God was not keeping Mephibosheth against his will. He didn't say, well, you can't leave. You're a prisoner in my home. It wasn't that way. God said, you're welcome into my place. David said, you're welcome to eat at my table. It's an invitation. It's an invitation that's ongoing. It's an invitation that's to everybody. And so we accept or reject. And we even know after we've accepted the invitation, we can always say, well, I want to go back. Really? You want to go back? Where would you go back to? I want to go back to that place of nothing. I want to go to that place of barrenness. I want to go back to that place where there's no life. And God's like, well, after you've been in my kingdom and you've eaten from my table and you've enjoyed the blessings I have, and why would you want to go back? Why would you want to return to that place? And so that's why God continually encourages us. Stay. Remain in my place. Remain in the family. Remain at the table. And through that, we also now have an opportunity to bless other people as well. To share that grace, to share the blessings we have, to share the compassion we've received. We can give that to others because God's been good. If we can encourage you today in your walk with Christ, if today you want to accept Christ and say, that's the kind of invitation I want. I want to go from a place where it's nothing and nowhere and there's no future and no hope. I want that place that God has at his table in a relationship with the family. I want to be brought in. You can do that today by accepting Christ in your life. and turning from that old way of nothingness to say, I want to live the true life that God has for me. I'm going to live for him. And if today you want to be baptized into Christ to get that relationship started, we always give the opportunity. We always give an invitation in the name of God to come home and to live in his house. If we can encourage you today, let's stand, we'll sing this song, and let us know how we can be a blessing.